Randy, Pat, thank you so much for joining us. So you guys did a session earlier here at the International Conference on Medical Device Standards and Regulation. The focus of that talk was cloud computing, and you're both the co-chairs of our Cloud Computing Committee. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. But before we do that, why don't you say a word about who you are and introduce yourselves a little bit. So Randy, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Randy Horton. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer for Orthogonal, who's an AAMI member. We are focused on improving patient outcomes faster by delivering great connected software. So all the software that's regulated as part of a device, but is not inside physically a device. We've been big fans and advocates and adopters of using cloud computing in medical devices, but have always felt that there were a couple gaps that had to be addressed. And through our relationship with Pat, found an opportunity to kind of help step up and address them.
I'm glad to hear it was only a couple. I think we're going to find more than that just today. So Pat, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Pat Baird. I call myself a software standards geek and software regulatory geek, working for Philips. Found Randy at a conference and managed to leverage his experience and bring him on as co-chair to this committee, exploring the topic.
Fantastic. So define a little bit what the space is. What are the sort of current applications of cloud computing in the medical device space? So you talked about not inside the device, but what are the scenarios that we're solving for?
So it's two different questions. One is all the uses of cloud in the medical device space. There are many. You can use the cloud in building and designing your device. You can use your cloud to help operate the device. You can use the cloud and probably do for all the logistics and manufacturing and all the quality systems and everything around that. We are specifically focused on using the cloud in the operation of the medical device because that's a very different set of rules than traditional just quality computing inside medtech and life sciences. When you get into a 62304, the bar goes up on change management.
Right, because it's in the clinical flow of the application of the medical device. So Pat, what are some of the challenges with that? Why is that so hard? Why do we have a committee focused just on that?
So, in the past, we know that the medical device manufacturer doesn't sit down and write all the software that goes into the medical device, that we'll buy some off-the-shelf software. Somebody already has written software that does function X. So we buy that. We take and test it before we put it in our product, and do some more testing, make sure everything's fine. One of the challenges with the cloud is that often we're using third-party suppliers. Somebody else has written a cloud, and we're subscribing to that service. We're buying that service from them. That also means that that software is out of our control. That vendor can take and update things whenever they want. They can add new features. They can fix bugs. They can do whatever to it. And we, as the manufacturer, don't necessarily know that they'd made that change. And they've changed it and implemented it, and it's effective as of right now, but we haven't had a chance to make sure that our product is still safe and effective. The challenge then is some people started building their own cloud, writing their own cloud, but they're medical device specialists, not necessarily cloud specialists. So the quality of the work is actually better from many of the vendors than having a homegrown cloud. So there's just this interesting tension between using a third-party thing that you can't control, but is a higher quality than the internal thing that you could write. And so try to take and figure out a rational way through that it protects the patient.
When with pretty much everyone being agile these days, that's a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a year problem, right? It's not just once a year. So no.
Right.
So, Joe, you've been active with the committee, and what are some of the details of what the work is?
I think it's been a very interesting committee. They've already produced one consensus report. Maybe you can tell us just briefly about the consensus report that was produced and what it did.
I'm going to turn to Randy again for that one.
Sure. So the consensus report basically explicitly, we stand up and say, the cloud is a little different than what we're used to. Let's admit it. That's full stop. Let's admit that we no longer have full control over when the device is updated. Somebody else has permission to do it, and there's a lot of really good things that come with that because nobody's going to get security patches in or have more highly paid cybersecurity engineers than one of these firms that runs a very large-scale cloud. But the difference is that in terms of the validated state and change, one of those security patches, and literally in the time I've been saying these sentences, they could, your cloud instance could have been updated 32 times in different ways. One of those security patches could have inadvertently adulterated your device. And so it's not that you say, well, don't use the cloud. It's saying, okay, let's do what we do really well. Let's do a risk-based analysis of the functions of the medical device, understand what the risks are on certain ones if certain things go wrong with the cloud out of your control, decide what you're going to put on the cloud, what you're not going to put on the cloud, and then kind of what kind of monitoring you're going to do and what kind of mitigations you can do around that. And then really, instead of being surprised when something happens and scrambling like, oh, gee, we have to run and make a change, just get good at change. Get good at updating your medical device sooner and making it better on a more regular basis, and let that be your way to just continually spot and fix the device.
So it sounds like division of function is one of the key elements here. So I assume that's when you look at risk, it's saying, okay, we're not going to have life-supporting functions in a cloud where decisions are happening in the cloud or being supported in the cloud if we might not have access to those for a period of time, things of that sort. Is it sort of that straightforward as you go through the sort of the risk process?
Well, that's literally the example we use is there's a wearable defibrillator that it's somewhere on its way to making its way to the market. You wear it for the 30 days after general surgery when you're more likely to have a heart attack. So yeah, nobody's going to move the software on this device that monitors heart function, diagnoses and says there's something going on with your heart, or saying clear and giving a little zap, which is my assumption of what it does. Nobody's going to move that to your smartphone or the cloud because Bluetooth connection lost is not an option. However, I'd bet good money that medical device is, when it is connected to the cloud, is sending back data from the patient, and they're notifying the doctor of updates on those things, or if there was an incident, and they're probably collecting data that they can use to tune the device for you. And probably in an aggregate, when you put all that together, you get some pretty amazing population health data, detail, and you can use that to improve the device overall, personalized medicine, those kinds of things. But if that goes down, it's okay.
Right. It's not real-time critical. Yeah.
AAMI is coming at this from the medical device manufacturer's side. We've been writing standards for medical devices for a long time. Our community is medical device manufacturers. But your committee has attracted the participation of a lot of big tech companies whose names everybody would know if we said them, who are actually helping and beginning to step their foot in this pool of regulated medical devices. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience has been like, working with them, helping them to understand why medical devices may be a little different than non-life critical technologies that might also use the cloud?
Mm-hmm. Well, one nice thing is that those vendors realize the importance of quality, and having an effective product, and also having plans in place in case something goes wrong. And so with these vendors, they're very aware of that. We might have an extra focus because we're medical devices and we know members of our family that have been on some of our devices. So it's a little more personal. But a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from these vendors as we've in this is, yes, this is what the vendor's been talking about internally. Yes, we recognize that this is a good way to approach X, and we want a high-quality product. So, my experience has been they've been very open for the feedback, very eager to take and participate in this.
And yes, that doing this under AAMI's umbrella and AAMI's sort of franchise around guidance and standards is a very good way to go to have this happen. Some of them sort of said off the record, I'm glad somebody's finally doing this because we're the vendor, we can't quite say it, but we're thrilled to support you with this. Because, there are applications already in use of the cloud in the medical devices that may actually have some risk because people did it not being aware of some of these issues or having a strategy around it. And then there's a ton of computing that probably belongs in the cloud with a medical device, but isn't because the manufacturer doesn't have a roadmap that says if you follow these instructions, you're good. You're good with your regulators. You can feel good about what you've done. And so this is going to actually open up a lot of market share for them. I think if AAMI was able to negotiate a percentage of the total addressable market we're going to open up.
Make a note here. Let's see.
We'll work on that. This was, to my understanding, the first document, the consensus report, that really addressed the cloud computing directly with medical devices and medical device quality systems that also use the cloud. And it was a fairly limited document, 6 recommendations, I think, with rationale and explanations about why you have that recommendation and how someone might implement it. There are other standards for cloud computing, I'm sure, but none that really are addressing this particular issue, this particular use case.
So I was doing part of the literature search and just the general research of what's out there, so we're not reinventing the wheel. I did find some standards related to cloud computing and cloud services, but they weren't specific to healthcare. Mm-hmm. I did find some others that were, if you're going to take and engage and start using a cloud service for your hospital, then, here's some questions you might want to take and ask them. But nothing to the level of what we're talking about for medical devices and all of the risk analysis that we need to do, the stratification for things, having plans in place for when something doesn't quite go right, et cetera. So other industries and even our industry is looking into it, but not from this particular angle.
Okay. I would say we take change management. That's where we really double down. So you use this is the spinal tap metaphor. Other standards, they can go to 10, but when we need a little extra, we go to 11. We take change control to an 11. And we're actually legally obligated to. There's probably a lot of other clinical applications or critical infrastructure applications where it might benefit them to look a little bit at what we're working on. They're not mandated to do it, but it might be a pretty good idea.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask, are there other industries, mission critical, life supporting now? Think of aviation. We use aviation all the time as an example, who have solved a similar set of problems, or is there just not a perfect corollary out there to look to?
We have somebody on our team who's been looking and has yet to find anything. I actually put in a call to a very old friend who does autonomous car standards. Autonomous driving standards. That's a good example, yeah. And she said, we're debating how to handle over-the-air updates to the car and however you can push them. But the idea that we actually wouldn't control all of the hardware and software in the car is so far out from where we're at right now.
All right, so we got to get Elon on here next. That's the next guest. All right, so where were you going, Joe?
I was going to ask about regulation and regulators. I mean, we know that medical device regulators around the world are really struggling with how they regulate digital health because of issues like change control, risk, and things. Are regulators involved in this work? Are they interested in this work? Are they doing anything in this area now?
This project actually started because a regulator called me and said, hey, this is an issue. We see there's lots of benefits for doing this, in particular using a high-quality third-party cloud instead of what we're seeing now is people are having their homegrown clouds. So regulators very, very interested because all of this is helping the patient, right? We're getting more features, more benefits for the patient, and doing it in a very controlling manner for that new risk that's being introduced. We've also talked about this internationally, and there's very much international interest in how this can apply to the medical device field.
So what's next? What's the committee working on now? What are some objectives? And I think we're going to spend some time together as a group tomorrow talking about all those things, and maybe the answer comes tomorrow. But from your perspective now, what's the next major accomplishment you want to see happen with the committee?
We spent some time face to face with the committee, and it's really good just being able to take and concentrate rather than an hour here, an hour there. No, a couple all-day sessions that we had brainstorming with the group. Just sort of compiled, what are the table of contents? What are the major components that we think needs to take and go into this? Okay, who's volunteering for what section? Who wants to do the testing plan versus the risk evaluation versus the et cetera. Very enthusiastic group, and they're very much wanting to move quickly. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, so we'll get the TIR out as soon as we can. It's a much more substantial document because it's basically saying, here's how you do it. Okay, we've agreed on the principles in the consensus report.
So
but
it's
there's
a natural next iteration
it's-
after the guidance
Yeah,
document.
right.
Now you have a
Very much.
technical
The
information
consensus
report.
report was useful, but if somebody said, "What do I do next?" they might look at it and say, "Oh, thanks, Pat and Randy. You gave me the problem and a very high level thing, and said you go figure it out and do your risk management yourself." We'd like to give some tools and techniques in more detail around that, and put that out. And then there's certainly looking at international and spreading our gospel that way. And on the other hand, there's a I'd say a realization we had. We called it the funny thing that happened on the way to the consensus report for the Sondheim fans out there. And it was this idea that when we looked at our recommendations around the cloud and giving up control, this idea, I'm giving up a little bit of control, but man, am I getting a lot of value out of it. And that's an okay trade-off because I can mitigate, as long as I understand I'm giving up control, I can manage to that because we're really good at that. That's what we do in medical devices. But it's not just a cloud issue. It's just about everything in modern computing. Anywhere where you're doing something modern in computing and putting that into a medical device, that's a distributed computing function. It's that your computer is not all resident on the chip or right inside the device. When you have an app, a smartphone app that any consumer can download on any version of their iPhone or Android pretty much, you're relying on the stability of those systems. You're relying on their computation power and how they present things. If you're calling a AI algorithm that's separate, you're relying on something else. If you're consulting pollution index data because you need to calculate a diagnosis or a therapeutic dose, you're calling something else that you don't fully control. Those are all the same thing. And by the way, if you're integrating with electronic medical records, so you can have intelligent flow of data back and forth, that's another one. These are all about giving up control to some extent to gain a lot of value, and the principles apply. And so I think we're very interested in possibly generalizing some of this work and putting it out as a separate piece of guidance. We haven't really figured out how. That then all those other groups, if you're doing an AI standard, you're doing an EHR integration standard, you could all reference this instead of everybody reinventing the wheel on this.
Interesting. Final thoughts, Joe?
No, that's very exciting, and I think, as you said, the next step is the TIR, which will then hopefully maybe lead to a standard, either an AAMI standard or preferably an ISO IEC standard. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the great work you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.